Hello, my friends. This is Jeff Castman, and today I'm here with an extraordinary interview. You've heard some interviews from me before, mostly about things that are of interest to Christians and Catholics, people in politics, issues relating to men. But right now, we're going to have an extraordinary conversation with Chad Howard. Chad is a husband and a father. He is also a fugitive actively wanted by the FBI and has a Interpol Red Notice out on him. And as you hear this story, you're going to be as shocked probably as I was when I first heard it. Chad, welcome to our chat today.
Thank you. And probably worth mentioning, you and I, although we don't know each other super well, we go back over 20 years.
Yes, 22 years ago, you and I were both involved in Republican politics in Tennessee. I think our paths crossed briefly, but it's not like we were close friends, but maybe acquaintances. And so when I saw you on TikTok sharing what's happened to you over the last 10 years or so, I thought I'd heard a lot of crazy stories, but yours has got to be right up there among the most extraordinary.
I definitely agree, and that's why it's hard to get people to believe it.
So let's just give people a little bit of a background before we get into like the blacklist kind of story and all the rest of it. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Erie County, Pennsylvania. Between Erie, the city of Erie, and a small town called Edinburgh. I went back and forth, moved several times, but basically Erie County, Pennsylvania.
All right, where did you go to school?
Well, I went to talking like elementary and middle school. That was Erie County, Pennsylvania. I went to school in Edinburgh for elementary and middle school, and then for high school, I went to Cathedral Prep in Erie, Pennsylvania. For college, I actually had 3 years of college done before I left high school, and that was because the Catholic school I went to was paired with the university, and some of the advanced kids were allowed to go to the university. So I spent most of my last 2 years at the university and not so much at the high school, and that was Gannon University. And I also attended Edinburgh for a very short time, and I also attended Penn State University for a very short time as well.
And what did you do after college?
After college, I had already been programming since a kid, and I did a bunch of odd jobs for a year or two, like pest control and Domino's Pizza and Radio Shack and stuff like that. But pretty quickly, I got some contract work as a software developer and went straight into the field. And I was a team leader of senior developers. Even at age 19, I was doing things like that. And then, of course, I went on to Microsoft and much bigger things as well.
So after college, like a lot of people, you got married, had a kid, you were traveling, you name dropped Microsoft there, obviously, pretty great name to have on your resume. You were traveling all over the world, you were giving speeches, looked like your career was going great, but something must not have been great at home because somebody filed for divorce. Tell us about that.
Well, that was before I was at Microsoft, but I was an international speaker by that point. I was already traveling internationally and speaking at conferences, and I was very well known, actually. I was very high up in the field. And it was just, we got married too young. It was just really never a marriage that probably should have never happened, but we didn't really hate each other. We just kind of got along. And so in 2001, I just decided, it just wasn't working. My life was heck, and I thought it was just kind of that's the way it was, and I was going to put up with it. And we decided to separate, and pretty much everything went okay. I didn't hate her or anything. There wasn't any animosity from my standpoint. So I gave her the house. She had like a $500 house payment, and the house was pretty paid down. She didn't have a lot left on it. And we had 2 vehicles, both were fairly new. So I left her the vehicle, and then I agreed to pay alimony and child support and so forth. And I thought, okay, we're just going to kind of part our ways. And then when it came to visitation, she was like, nope, you can't see him. And it just became a battle from the very beginning to even see my son. And especially since I had moved overseas pretty much immediately, because when we separated, I got a job offer to do more work overseas. And so I took it. And so for me to come back and visit him, I had to come to the United States. And I would come, and then they would like not be home and things like that. And so it was an immediate fight from the very beginning over even visitation. And I even gave her custody at the beginning because we had joint custody. We had, legal, we had to make decisions, but she had residential custody because I knew that no judge was going to send him overseas with me. And he was in school and he had friends there. And I just felt that it was best to kind of leave him where he had grown up and that I would make the sacrifice to come back and forth to visit him and so forth. But that just wasn't enough for her. Nothing was ever enough for her. Nothing.
Yeah. So a lot of divorces start out, everybody's trying to do well, and then things deteriorate over time. So at some point you had some sort of a custody, and tell us where it kind of went off the rails.
Well, immediately she wouldn't allow me to visit him, wouldn't be home. So we ended up back in the court right away over that. And so then we got a firmer visitation where she basically didn't have any right to object if I gave her, like, it was like, I don't know, like 2 weeks notice someone's coming to the country, and she had to abide by it, and she didn't abide by that. And then in 2004, early 2004, she would interfere with the phone calls. So I'd try and call him and they would never pick up the phone. They would always leave it to the answer machine. Well, one time she was, I don't know, outside of the horses or something. And my son at this time, he was about 8, and he heard me on the answer machine. So he picked it up and he started talking to me. And he's like, "Yo, Dad, we're moving." I'm like, "You are?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, you want to tell me where?" And she had sent me a letter prior to this that she says, I don't think I want to stay in Tennessee anymore. I want to move to Pennsylvania, Ohio, or New York, because then she would be closer to the grandparents who were all in Pennsylvania at the time. And I said, okay, I agree in principle. But I didn't say, hey, just pick up and move or whatever. I said, okay, that sounds like a decent idea. And in general, I don't oppose the idea. And so he told me, no, we're moving. And that was news to me because she had only expressed, general interest to move, but not actual intent. And so he told me, yeah, we're moving to Cherry Tree. And the next thing I know, she came, I could hear the door open and she slammed the phone down and hung up on me. And you could tell he wasn't supposed to tell me anything. So when that happened, we filed with the Tennessee court where the divorce and custody and everything happened, because you can't just leave a state without telling somebody. You have to go to the court. You're supposed to give them, in Tennessee and in most states this way, you got to give them 30 days notice.
Right.
And then they generally say, okay, as long as you give us contact information and everything's gonna, all the custody is gonna be enforced and so forth, then it's okay. But she didn't want to do any of that. So we filed an injunction, basically not stopping her from leaving the state of Tennessee, just telling her, listen, you got to go through the court and at least tell us where you're going and transfer the custody. She didn't do that. She just disappeared. And so we had no idea where she was. And the only clue we had was my son had said the word Cherry Tree, and that letter that said that, she was looking at maybe moving to Pennsylvania, Ohio, or New York, but that's kind of a big area. That's not a small area. That's bigger than a lot of countries. And she just disappeared. We had no idea where she was whatsoever. So I had to fly back to the United States. I started making lots of phone calls, and it took a long time because there's a lot of places called Cherry Tree. And we tried Cherry Hill.
Let's pause for a second. I mean, isn't that kidnapping?
Yes, it is. And this was the first time she did it. She did it twice.
Right.
And so we finally found him, and it turns out they were in Cherry Tree Township. It wasn't even a town or anything. So then I started calling all the schools in that county. And as the father, one of them finally relented and sent me a copy of his enrollment records in Cherry Tree Elementary. So I flew back to the US, and we had to go through a whole bunch of court hearings, and they ordered her, the Tennessee court says, listen, you got to come to Tennessee court, and she didn't want to. So we went to Pennsylvania court. And Judge White, where all this started, he says, listen, you can't just move to their state. You got to go back. So he ordered her back to Tennessee, and she didn't want to go. So what Judge White did is he transferred custody of my son back to me while I was in the United States. And she still didn't want to do it. So he had to order the state police to go take them out of the house. So the state police went in and removed him out of the house, transferred him to me. And then that was just before Christmas 2004. And then we went to Williamsburg for a couple of days. My family came, and then I think I'm having to work off memory here. I think we went to Disney World for a week or so, and then we moved back to Tennessee. And we lived in Tennessee for like 3 or 4 months. It was until mid-March, so 3 months. And we enrolled him in school. We lived in Sevierville, Tennessee, and he was enrolled in school there until the next court hearing. And at the next court hearing, this was back before Judge Fanzer in Tennessee, the one who had handled the custody of the divorce, everything. Remember, my son was born in Tennessee. He was only raised in Tennessee. It was the only place he knew. And The judge said, well, you're in contempt of court, young lady. There's no reason for doing any of this, but I'm not quite ready to transfer the son to live overseas quite yet. But he warned her. He says, listen, if you violate this again, I'm going to transfer custody to the father. This is very clear. So he says, young lady, it's your last chance. Don't goof up. And she didn't want to do anything. So she still wanted me to have to come to the U.S. But he says, what I am going to do is, since you've basically flaunted this court, you didn't, I issued an injunction and you just took off. You didn't even tell the court where you're going. So he says, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give the father visitation in the summer overseas, though. And I don't care if you don't like it. She didn't like it. So I gained summer visitation overseas, which made it a lot easier on me. So that was in March 2005. Okay. And then what happened was, it was getting near June and she wouldn't apply for his passport. She refused. She says, I'm not applying for a passport. I don't have to. And of course, he can't come overseas without a passport. So we had to get a special order ordering her to apply for the passport. And we got that. She says, Tennessee order. I don't live in Tennessee. They can't do anything to me. So we went to Judge White. Judge White issued a Pennsylvania order ordering her to get the passport. So she finally got the passport, and it came back like just a few days before he flew overseas. And it was my cost. I had to pay for the flights. So I booked the flight. The flight had been booked even before he had the passport. And the day came to get on the plane. And guess what? He didn't get the plane. So then he was missing all summer.
He's a minor. He's a minor at this point.
Yes, he was 8.
So he's completely dependent upon his mom to do everything for him, get him to the airport, all that sort of stuff.
Yes. I'd have to check the records, but I think at that time my parents were supposed to pick him up, and I have to look at the court record. But if I remember, they went and the house was closed. There was nobody there, and they were nowhere to be found. And I had called, and she hung up on me. So it was obvious what she was doing. She knew the date had been arranged and everything. It was very clear. There was no dispute about what was going on. So since she didn't show up, now he'd only been in Pennsylvania. He'd been in Pennsylvania in the fall of 2004 for about 2 months illegally. And the Tennessee court clearly said that he was not in Pennsylvania legally. And then, so after March, she got custody again. So I had custody from December 2004 till mid-March or sometime in March 2005. The judge transferred custody.
So did he ever come to live with you overseas at that point?
Soon, but not in 2005. So what happened was, in March, the judge transferred custody back to her. So she had custody for part of March, April, and May. And then early June, he was supposed to come overseas again. So he was basically in Pennsylvania for just 2.5 months. And we went to the Tennessee court because the Tennessee court was still had jurisdiction. She had not been in Pennsylvania legally. And when she'd only been there 2.5 months. And it takes 6 months of permanent residency before the courts transfer jurisdiction. And they have to actively transfer it. The courts have to communicate and say, okay, we're taking jurisdiction and we agree. And you can't just, pick it up without whatever. So summer came and he wasn't on the plane. So we went and filed in Tennessee again. And it was August before we could get a court date. And I believe it was August 12th, maybe the 15th, but I'm pretty sure it was the 12th. And Judge Fansler in Tennessee held a hearing. And he basically said, look, I told you I was going to transfer custody if he was not in that plane. So he wasn't playing, so he transferred custody. Well, she didn't like that, and she was in Pennsylvania. So she went to the Pennsylvania judge again. And the Pennsylvania judge says, listen, you have to go to Tennessee. It doesn't matter. You have to go to Tennessee. So she went back to Tennessee, finally, and it was now October. Okay? So in October 2005, the judge in Tennessee had a whole hearing, and she had fired her lawyer, and she was lying on the stand. She got caught perjuring herself, and I have transcripts of all this. It got so bad that the judge in Tennessee said, listen, I don't believe what you're saying, young lady. I don't believe even what you're saying about your previous lawyer. So he told I don't know what's called the bailiff or the police officers in the courtroom. And he told him, he says, listen, I want you to find this young lady's lawyer. We're going to take a lunch break. You're going to find him. And if he's in the county, you tell him the judge is calling him to court. So her previous lawyer came to court and basically said she was lying, caught her perjuring on the stand. And the judge, of course, was not happy because the judge had already transferred custody to me back in August. She just didn't want to abide by it. So in the courtroom right there, he said, listen, I already transferred custody in August. So we're basically going to take the kid. You can go back home to Pennsylvania, but the kid's going to the father now. And so we took him. I traveled back to the U.S. for all this. And he returned back to Europe with me.
So at this point, the courts have recognized that she has repeatedly effectively kidnapped the kid. Even if she wasn't found guilty in a court, effectively she was guilty of kidnapping and contempt, essentially, and she had perjured herself. And so the judge finally says, all right, I've had enough, and he awards custody to you, even to take your kid to Europe.
Yes. And he told her, he says, if I see you in my courtroom again, you're going to jail. Because she had violated so many things. I have copies of the transcripts. I put them on the website, somewhere on TikTok, where the judge even says, he says, young lady, you've made it clear you will go to any length to hide the child from the father. So that was October 2005. He came over to live overseas with me in Europe. I was working for Microsoft at the time. And she had summer visitation, though. And I still had to pay for the travel, which I knew that I had a much better job. So I never really complained about that. I never wanted to hide him from her. So I said, okay, I'll pay for the summer visitation flights. It's not a problem. And she also had the option to visit on holidays, but she had to pay for that. So if she wanted for Christmas, she would have to pay for that. And I was cool with that too. So the next summer came. This would be 2006 now, June 2006. And I had to fly to Seattle for Microsoft for a convention. So he and we flew to Boston. In Boston, we separated, and I paid for an escort to fly him back to Pennsylvania. I went on to Seattle. I never set foot in Pennsylvania in 2006 at all, okay? And in fact, this is the last time I was in the United States. I was there for 1 week, and I was in Washington State, unless you count the airports I transited through, but I didn't even transit through a Pennsylvania airport. And so I sent him back for summer visitation, and everything was going pretty good. She wasn't really letting me call him a whole lot, but I got through a few times, and I didn't really complain. I figured, okay, he's coming back, end of August, and if I can only reach him a few times, well, then that's what it is. So then middle of August, don't remember the exact date, I think the 13th or 14th, she files in Pennsylvania an emergency court order saying that Europe is basically not a safe place to live. And she made up a whole bunch of other stuff. Like she said, I got mugged, and she said a bunch of other stuff. None of it had any basis in fact. And it was just crazy stuff. And so the judge said, no, I'm not going to listen. This was Judge White in Pennsylvania. But he said, I will have a hearing because she said, I'm not putting him on the plane. I don't care. I'm not putting him on the plane. So we asked Judge White. And on August 31st, Judge White ordered her to put him on the plane. He says, no, the Tennessee order is still valid. And in fact, when Tennessee gave me custody, Tennessee says, listen, the father lives overseas. And according to treaties, that means that any custody disputes are overseas too, okay? Because foreign countries are treated as states when it comes to these types of things. And I said, well, that's not really fair to her. I said, why don't we keep it in Tennessee? And I asked the judge, I said, why don't you keep it in Tennessee? Because at least you know the history of the case and so forth. And so he said, okay. So we put it in order that Tennessee will hold jurisdiction of this case until the child reaches 18. Because he was born there, we were divorced there, we lived there. She moved to Pennsylvania later. And I could have, fought that, but I actually asked for it. And I thought everything was cool. Well, the judge in Pennsylvania said, okay, so I'm going to enforce the Tennessee order. You put him on the plane, and she didn't want to do it. So she got the police involved. They had the police involved, a big mess. So anyways, my parents ended up getting him, and they put him on the plane, and he left the United States. I think it was August 31st or September. I think it was September 1st, the day after court hearing. And he arrived back in Europe on September 2nd. And we thought, okay, everything's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, after all as bad as everything you had been through up to this point, and all the legal stuff is kind of going your way, you must have thought, well, maybe things are going to get a little bit better from this point on.
Okay, so then we thought everything was good. He arrived back in Europe, and everything was good. And then we find out the judge has set another hearing. And he's like, oh, we're going to have a hearing, and you have to come back with the child. I'm like, wait, you just put him on a plane to me. And you're demanding that I basically quit my job because Microsoft was not happy with all the time I was taking off with court and stuff. And I had my dream job at Microsoft as a senior position. I had a territory of 85 countries. I was over top of, people in offices throughout the Middle East and Africa. It was my absolute dream job. I would probably still be at Microsoft if I hadn't been basically forced out. And so we get this notice that basically on a few weeks' notice, the judge is like, you got to show up to court in Pennsylvania. Now, I have not lived in Pennsylvania at this point since 1994. And I had not even set foot in the state since sometime in 2005 when I had visited some family. And the last time I was even in the United States was in June 2006. So now he's like, you got to show up to court. And I'm like, I can't. I'm going to lose my job. There's no reason. If you had any issues, you had the child in your custody in August. So why did you reinforce Tennessee order, then order me to show up to court? So we said, you have no jurisdiction. Tennessee has jurisdiction over the order anyways. Even you said on August 31st, you said the Tennessee order is valid. So you have no right whatsoever. So we sent lawyers, and the judge got mad because I didn't show up. And at one point he says, well, you don't have to show up, but you have to send the child. So I'm like, I'm supposed to take the child out of school, send him to you, and you just had him a few weeks ago. And the judge is like, yep. So we're like, no, you have no jurisdiction. Send the lawyers. And the judge didn't like that. So then what he did was he had another hearing in December, I believe it was 27th, 2006. And he said, well, since you're not going to show up to my court, I'm giving the mother temporary custody. Now, here's the thing. This judge is really cheeky. He knew what he was doing. He made an interlocutory order, which for lay people is a temporary order. It's not a permanent order. It's not a final. It's a temporary order. Now, in the state of state of Pennsylvania, temporary orders are not appealable. We tried to appeal it anyways, and the Supreme Court said, no, the appeals court said you can't appeal temporary orders. So we got special permission to appeal a temporary order, which took months, and I think it even took well over a year. And we finally got to appeal this order. And the appeals court said, you didn't file on time. But the reason we didn't file on time, and we did file on time, but it was turned down because it was an interlocutory order. So they never allowed us to appeal it. So then this order just sat. And then 2007 rolled around, and I have copies of all this. In January 2007, her phone was disconnected. So my lawyer sent a letter to her lawyer saying, hey, this young lady's phone's been disconnected. We can't reach her. And she refused to use email. So the only thing left I had to correspond with her was by postal mail. And she never gave us another phone number. And then soon the postal mail started coming back, and I found out her house had been sold. So she moved. We had no way to reach her whatsoever. And of course, by the time summer 2007 came around, I had no contact for her, and she had conflicting orders. So there was no way that I could send her back for summer visitation. It just wasn't possible. I didn't even know where she was. So our goal was, well, if she wants to come after me for a violation, first of all, I can't reach her, So go to the Tennessee court. If I'm in violation, she'll go to the Tennessee court and we'll resolve it. But she didn't do that. So what she did instead was she kept working with the FBI and stuff behind the scenes. She reported him as kidnapped. She said, I came into her house and removed him. So the state police called my mother. So my mom said,
hold on just a second. You had custody.
Yep.
And permission to take your child to Europe, and that's where he's been living for some time now. And then you ignored the court order in Pennsylvania, claimed that he didn't have the jurisdiction, and all this time he's living with you legally, and your ex-wife then tells the FBI that you came and physically removed the child from her residence.
Well, she told the state police that.
State police, all right.
Yes, and me at this time that I didn't have a phone number for her, I had no address for her, and we just want to go back to Tennessee. Okay, so yeah, she told the state police that I came in the house and kidnapped him. So the state police talked to my mom, and he left his number, and I don't remember the name of the guy, but I called the state police barracks, and I talked to the guy, and I explained what was going on. And he said, well, she's just a distraught mother. I can see that, she's upset and everything. So I'm just going to take this kidnapping report, and I'm going to pretend like she never filed it. And I said, listen, this lady's been harassing me. Can't we do something like filing a false report? He's like, listen, she's just a troubled young lady. Just leave her alone. And I thought, okay, that was the end of it. So then I found out she was actually working with the FBI, and they were coaching her what to do. FBI and NCMEC. NCMEC and FBI were working with her to coach her how to trump this up more. So what they did was they started.
Tell people what NCMEC is.
National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, the milk carton people. And the problem is they have hundreds of kids who are not actually missing. And they listed my son for 16 years. He was listed as missing, even though he's done TV interviews, until July 3rd of this year, when I did a TikTok that got over 1 million views, and they removed him in a few hours. Amazing how that works. We've had lawyers have a contact with NCMEC as far as 2008. Because what she did was in 2008, on April 1st, April Fool's Day, it gets better, she went back to Judge White. She went back to Judge White, or maybe it was Boyer, because Judge White retired at one time, became the senior judge, and then Boyer got involved. And at this point, I don't remember if it was Boyer or White. But in Pennsylvania, Venango County, she got a bench warrant for me for a failure to appear. Not a bench warrant for kidnapping, not a bench warrant for failure to appear to court. To a court that had no jurisdiction to order me to appear in the first place, okay? And then she took that bench warrant, went to NCMEC, and used the bench warrant for a failure to appear to file him as missing and listed him as missing. So somehow we found out that the poster was up there, I forget how or whatever, but the U.S. Embassy in Cyprus got a hold of me, and they're like, we need to talk. And I'm like, what about? They're like, where's your son? I'm like, he's with me, and I live right here. And they're like, okay. They went away. And then she got the KGB because we have family in Russia, and I was traveling between Russia and Cyprus. She got the KGB, and for the nitpickers, yeah, I know they're called the FSB now, but almost no Westerner knows that, so I'm just going to call them the KGB. They showed up at the house, checking on him, and they're like, right here. And they're like, okay, we'll report back. And we kept getting all these calls from the embassies, and just all these people, all the parts of the U.S. government just kept harassing me, like, where's the child? I'm like, he's right here. And they're like, okay, and they went away. So we thought everything was, just that was going to be kind of the end of it. And then it was 2000, October, I just did a thing on this, October 11th, 2009, I traveled to Bulgaria. And, of course, if I thought I was wanted, I wouldn't do anything. And I didn't know anything. And I was at a conference and I was speaking, and it was just before my first session, October 13th. And 4 Bulgarian police show up at my door, undercover police. And they said, here, basically, it took me away to the police station. And I figured, oh, it's just, gosh, this is getting so bad. Now, not only has she got people harassing me where we live, harassing my family, harassing my wife's family. Oh, the FBI had shown up at my mom's house and threatened to drag my mom out of her wheelchair. My mom's blind in her wheelchair, and the FBI threatened to drag her out if they didn't help her. If she didn't help them. So anyway, so the police showed up, and long story short, I found out that I was an Interpol Red, and I spent 3 months in and out of Bulgarian prison, went through extradition proceedings. The U.S. did everything they could to prevent them from turning it down. The Bulgarian government denied extradition at the highest level. The government appealed, went to the highest level. They tried to keep me in prison as long as they could. They tried to capture me as I left Bulgaria. They tried to stop me from leaving Bulgaria. And then I came back to the Caribbean here, and while I was in Bulgaria, the FBI came to St. Kitts and tried to kidnap my 13-year-old son without even going through the court system here in the Caribbean.
All right, so let's back up a second. So you were living in Cyprus, I think, was when you started to hear, you were hearing, you knew that she was trying something. You didn't obviously understand at the time that she was working with the FBI and they were giving her instructions on how to kind of facilitate taking this out of a simple state court civil dispute and making it into a criminal thing. You didn't see that coming?
No. Because, and by the way, Tennessee, the whole time, was assessing child support against her until he was 18. So Tennessee's courts have said, yeah, we still have this order, and there was child support assessed until he was 18, and she's never paid a dime because the judge in Pennsylvania protects her from paying.
So you were in Cyprus, and obviously the FBI realized that they weren't going to cooperate, and so they waited, knowing that at some point, based on your career, you'd be traveling, and they would pick a jurisdiction where they thought that the jurisdiction would be susceptible to pressure from them to hand you over so that they could then extradite you.
Well, sort of.
That was probably all happening
what happened
behind
was,
the scenes.
In May 2009, and I didn't have any clue this, because in a federal grand jury, and for those who aren't aware, a federal grand jury is done secret, done behind closed doors. They do not notify the defendant, and then the defendant is not allowed to present any defense. It's a Stalin-type tactic that only 2 countries in the world basically have left, and the U.S. loves to use them. So in May, they had a secret court hearing in which it was the DA I went to high school with. Yeah, I went to high school with the DA, by the way. And the FBI agent and my ex-wife testified. And in that court hearing, even the FBI agent says, I haven't been in the U.S. since June 2006, but somehow I kidnapped him November 6, 2006, they said. So tell me how that makes any sense. They also, in all the press releases, say I'm a Titusville man, former Titusville man. I've never lived in Titusville or even the county it's in my life. Never even spent a night there. Titusville is where my ex-wife moved to.
Is this? And
it gets better. Hold on just 1 second. The judge, when he took jurisdiction over my son in Pennsylvania, he said my son was born in Crawford County, Pennsylvania, and that's how he took jurisdiction, but he wasn't. He was born in Tennessee. And they did all of this in a secret court hearing, which I knew nothing about until the Interpol Red hit me. So they were going to catch me anywhere I traveled. It didn't matter. It wasn't about jurisdiction. It was that they had the secret court hearing in May and then put out Interpol Red, and Interpol got me.
Okay, so I want to make sure I understand. So this was a state court in Pennsylvania, and they've got your wife, your ex-wife, a state trooper, and somebody from the FBI more or less deceiving the court in order to further this whole charge against you, which ended up in a federal grand jury.
It started out at the state court. The state police officer did not participate in any of it. The FBI did not participate in the state court level at all. The state court basically ended with I didn't show up to court for something I shouldn't have had to, and the judge transferred custody as an interlocutory order. Thereafter, she began to work with the FBI and NCMEC to take it to the federal level. And since then, the state charges have actually been dismissed as of 2021, but the federals won't drop their charges. And they basically just trumped up the state charges. And that's where the FBI and the DA and her testimony came involved.
So the feds have gotten you arrested in Bulgaria.
Yep.
And it wasn't like going to the drunk tank for a night or something.
Oh, no. Well, I started out in the drunk tank for a night, but after that, I was in prison.
And I got to believe Bulgarian prison's probably a little rougher than most American prisons. How long were you in Bulgarian prison, and what was the result?
I was in and out of Bulgarian prison for 3 months. The first stay was about 2 weeks, and then I had friends in Bulgaria. We convinced the Bulgarian courts to release me. They took all my documents and they released me, and I slept in a friend's kitchen for about 2 months. They rearrested me and put me back in a prison again for a few days, and there were a couple other times I was in and out. So total stay inside the prisons was maybe 3 weeks, but I was detained for the other 2+ months in Bulgaria.
And where was your son at this time?
He was back here in the Caribbean. Okay. with his stepmom and his 2 younger siblings.
Okay, so you eventually, the Bulgarians obviously decided they were not going to extradite you, and they probably wanted you gone and out of their hair, right?
More or less, yes. And the U.S. didn't like that, so the U.S. appealed it, and we had to go to the higher court and went before a panel of 3 top judges at the highest level in Bulgaria, and they confirmed extradition denied again, and so they let me go. But the problem is the U.S. had put so much pressure on the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that my visa was about to expire, but they'd seized my passport. So they gave my American passport to the Americans, and they never gave that back. And that had evidence in it too. That had evidence of where I was, and they destroyed it. So I had a second passport through marriage, and they tried to convince Bulgaria that passport was fake. And so then Bulgaria launched an investigation to see if my passport was fake or not. And it took a long time, but eventually what happened is the Bulgarian federal officials found out they're being lied to and turned on the U.S. and started to help me. So I got my other passport back, and I was able to, with the help of a former FBI agent and some Bulgarian officials, basically sneak back to the Caribbean so Interpol couldn't get me again. And I've been back in the Caribbean. I think I arrived a few hours before New Year's Day. So I think I got here like a few hours before midnight on December 31st, 2009. And I've been here ever since, and I can't leave. And I have serious medical problems, and my kidneys are failing, and I should have been air evacuated years ago, and I can't even go to the neighboring island because of Interpol. And our medical care here, we have 35,000 people on the island. Our medical care here is extremely basic, to say at best. They cannot handle kidney conditions like mine here. So
I'd love to go into all the details of that trip out of Bulgaria to St. Kitt's, but we'll have to do that another time, maybe. Not recorded. So you got out of Bulgaria. They had denied extradition. They decided that the United States federal government was lying to them. You came to St. Kitt's. Did the feds just give?
Well, I returned to St. Kitt's because that's another thing. The DA keeps saying that he escaped and hid in St. Kitt's. That's not true. I was already living in St. Kitt's before any of this happened. We moved to St. Kitt's in February 2008. And so I'd already been in St. Kitt's almost 2 years by the time they arrested me.
All right. So you had been living in St. Kitt's previously. So when you were able to leave Bulgaria, you returned to St. Kitt's. At this point, you've remarried. You've got children there. Your son was living there. I assume, did the feds know you were there? Did they think you were hiding? Pick it up there.
Well, they like to pretend that I've been hiding. Even in fact, the filing from March 25th, 2022, the DA who I went to high school with says, no, he's been hiding out in St. Kitt's for 13 years. His mother has been here. Oh yeah, by the way, while I was in prison in Bulgaria, first of all, state of Tennessee had revoked her driver's license and passport for non-payment of child support. The FBI got her passport back, and then they worked with NCMEC and they paid for a free Caribbean vacation. So while I was in prison, she arrived here in St. Kitt's, paid for by the FBI. They paid for her hotel, her ticket. They assigned her a lawyer. They paid for a lawyer. They gave her a cell phone, international calling. She showed up here while I'm in Bulgarian prison.
So they knew where your son was at that time, and yet he remained officially missing, kidnapped.
Yes, he remained missing until July 3rd of 2022. But So basically, actually, before she showed up here, a member of the U.S. Embassy came to our house and threatened to cut off the burglar bars of the apartment and take my son, and already had a reservation at the Marriott for my son, and they were going to take him out of the country illegally. They got caught. And so what happened is the Attorney General threw out a diplomatic official of the United States from St. Kitts. They told him, if you don't leave the country in 24 hours, you will be officially and diplomatically expelled, and it'll be an incident. So they threw him out of the country. Then when that failed...
So this is an employee of the U.S. Embassy in St. Kitts.
Yes, his name was Patrick Hines, and he was a regional security officer for the U.S. Embassy in Barbados. And they flew him here to capture my son.
All right, so RSO is a little more than just an employee of the embassy. That's actually a pretty senior person. And that individual attempted to kidnap your son.
Mr. Patrick Hines, and I have documentary evidence of this as well.
And when St. Kitts government found out about that, they had him expelled.
Yes.
Okay.
And
your wife, and you were saying previously, your ex-wife has also had, with the assistance of the federal government, came to St. Kitts.
After that failed.
What was her intention?
Well, she wanted to take him back too. So she went to court here. She went to the court here and said, I have a court order, I want to take him back. So what they did was we went through the court. Well, I wasn't here, but my new wife went through all this, had to go to court, had to get a lawyer, and they asked my son Alex, his name's Eris, but he goes by Alex. So they took him aside. The judge talked to him separately without anybody there, and at this time he was 13. So they said, well, you're 13, and first of all, the Tennessee order is the valid one. St. Kitts said Tennessee order is a valid one, so the father has custody, but let's ask the child anyways. So they asked him what he wants to do, and he says, well, I want to stay here till my dad gets back. And so the judge said, okay, well, case over. So they turned her down from taking him back. Now, here's the really interesting part. So she hasn't seen him since 2006 because, she moved. We had no contact information. We had no phone, no email, no mailing address, no way to reach her. Plus, she had these conflicting court orders. So yeah, she hadn't seen him since 2006. That's true, but that was not my doing. That was her doing. She did this on purpose so that she could say all this stuff. If she moves and I can't find her, then she can blame me for holding him. So she came down, and while she was here, the first thing they did before they denied, they had a court hearing right away, and they granted her visitation. They said, as long as she's here in the Caribbean, she can have him every other day from, I think it was like 9 to 5 or something, but it had to be supervised because they didn't trust her. They took her passport, took his travel documents, and said, look, you can have him. So she spent like 2 days with them, and then there was another court hearing. And the court hearing that turned her down, that said, okay, you can't have custody of him, you can't take him back, but you still have visitation. In fact, her visitation order was in effect till he was 18 here. Okay, so she could have come back anytime she wanted to visit him. She never did. But that day, the next day, she was supposed to visit with him again, and she called and she says, I've decided to go home. So she's making this big deal that she hasn't seen him. She doesn't know where he's at. She has an open ticket paid for by the FBI. The hotel's paid for by the FBI. She has no job. She has no husband. She has no other kids. There's nothing she has to rush back to. She could stay in the Caribbean, basically get a free Caribbean vacation. I'm sure they wouldn't let her stay here for a month, but she could have stayed another week or something, spent time with her son. What'd she do? She got up, changed her ticket, and went home. What kind of mother does that? I don't get it. It blew my mind. It blew my mind.
And yet all this time, allegedly, he's still been kidnapped and is missing, even though everybody knows the truth. At the state courts, the FBI, Bulgaria, St. Kitts, everybody knows the truth, but they're keeping up this facade. And now she spent time with him and had the opportunity to spend more time with him, but still there's an ongoing conspiracy at this point to treat you as a fugitive, and you remain on the Interpol's Red Notice.
The fugitive is a contentious issue too, because you look up the definition of a fugitive. A fugitive is somebody who escaped the jurisdiction. I was never in the jurisdiction. So if I haven't been in the United States since June 2006, they testified to that. How can I kidnap somebody November 6, 2006? And how can a court in 2009 say I escaped the jurisdiction if they indicted me long after I left and well before I was even accused of a crime? So I'm not even a fugitive, but they continue to say that I'm a fugitive. But technically, nope, I wasn't even there, so I didn't flee.
It is extraordinary that to imagine that the FBI would be working with and subsidizing the efforts of someone who was was themselves guilty of kidnapping and contempt and perjury. I mean, I mean, people maybe 5 years ago probably wouldn't have imagined this was possible. A lot has happened in the last 5 years. Probably the trust is not there, but I mean, it's not just a custody battle. It's an extraordinary story of the United States government working with someone who had already proved that they would deceive a court, lie on the stand in order to get what they wanted.
And keep in mind, he was not born in Pennsylvania. Remember, the judge took jurisdiction by saying he was born in Crawford County, Pennsylvania. He wasn't. He was born in Hawkins County, Tennessee. And the FBI knows about that mistake, and they don't care. In fact, in 2004, when she first kidnapped him, we were trying to locate him. I called the FBI Pittsburgh office, and I explained. And they said, we don't get involved in custody matters, can't help you. But the same office has been chasing me around the world ever since.
Right. So we've covered a lot of ground here, but I got to say, you don't look like a healthy guy. So there's obviously, there's more to this story. So tell me, what's the rest of the story? You're in St. Kitt's. You're kind of at a stalemate. You know, they've taken your U.S. passport. But what's the rest of the story here?
Well, I've been stuck here since 2009. Our hospital is very basic. We don't even have a cardiac unit. We didn't even have a dialysis unit until a couple years ago. And it's just economics. There's 35,000 people on the island. So imagine a rural health clinic out in the middle of Montana or someplace, and they probably have better care than we have. People get air evacuated off the island even for small kidney stones. I have serious kidney problems. My kidneys are slowly failing. My left kidney was at 50% function about 5 or 6 years ago. In 2015, we flew a surgeon in, and we had to wait for the equipment to arrive. Some equipment arrived, and that saved my life. That took out an 1.25 inch kidney stone. But since then, I've had passed hundreds of kidney stones. I passed one that was a 1/4 inch in diameter on my own. And I was supposed to be air evacuated off the island years ago, but I can't because I'll be arrested by Interpol again. And the thing is, if I get arrested by Interpol, I will be freed, but I have to go through the extradition process. And during that time, I'll be held most likely in prison. And extradition processes can take from weeks to months to years, and they cost tens of thousands of dollars, and I can't go through that again.
Yeah, and because of your physical condition, it's likely, frankly, that you would die in jail.
Exactly. I would.
Because I mean, I think everybody knows that prisoners are probably not at the top of the list when it comes to healthcare.
Not even close.
Have you made the courts aware of your physical condition? Have you asked them?
Oh, yes.
Have you asked them to work with you in the interest of justice to let the legal process move forward while taking into consideration the life-threatening health condition?
We have many times over the years, including the latest attempt. My lawyers have met with the DA, the senior DA, the FBI over the past couple of years. We've met with them several times. And most recently is this year, February 2022, we filed a petition with the federal court that basically says, 1, please dismiss. 2, if you will not dismiss, set a trial date and provide an air ambulance. Because there's a couple of things here. 1, if they were to try and extradite me out of St. Kitt's, by treaty, they'd have to pay for an air ambulance, but they won't try and extradite me because they know the courts will turn them down here because of what they did here before. Okay. And they tried a little bit to extradite me in 2009, but the government here told them, listen, you've lied to us so much and wasted so much of our resources. When it comes to Chad, you should just go away and not bother us. They were told that. So they know if they file in court here, they're going to lose anyways, even on the facts. But if they were to extradite me or if I were to give myself up, they would have to pay for my ambulance. So we filed it. We said, listen, set a trial date, because what they want to do is they want to bring me back, make me sit in prison for 3 to 5 years before a trial date, which I'll be found innocent. And they'll try and force a plea bargain on me in the meantime. Be like, you can get out of prison right now if you just plead to be guilty. And I know people they have done this to. There was a guy in Buffalo, New York recently that was held in prison for 8 years holding for a federal trial. And, we're all taught this myth of a speedy trial in middle school. It's all a myth. They can delay. So when we filed this thing, we basically said, listen, dismiss it. If you're not going to dismiss it, set a trial date and I will come back. I will come back if you pay for an air ambulance. Or let me travel to a nearby island first, get health care, and then I can fly commercial. And the DA basically said no. And he said, and I wish I was joking. Oh my gosh, I wish I was joking. First of all, he said, I've been hiding for 13 years. Second of all, he said, my conditions are not life-threatening. And yes, he has a copy of my medical report. And my medical report makes it very clear that I should have been air evacuated a long time ago, that my kidneys are failing, and as a matter of human rights, if for no other reason, they should allow me to get medical care. He said no. And he actually put this in a court filing dated March 25th, 2022, back to the judge, and says, we can't dismiss this for 2 reasons. 1, according to federal law, anything presented in a secret federal grand jury has to be accepted as fact. You can't challenge without going to trial. Number two, he said he Googled my health condition. I'm not joking. He took one word out of my medical report, Googled it. I mean, the FBI can't even consult a doctor. I mean, so Christian Trable, the DA I went to high school with, the one who thinks my son's born in Pennsylvania when he was born in Tennessee, the one who thinks I was in the United States in November 2006. Meanwhile, the FBI says I haven't been since June 2006. The FBI guy who thinks I'm a Titusville man, a place I've never lived before, said he Googled my health condition, and he's determined that people can live with one kidney, and therefore they don't need to do anything. And that I'm escaping justice now for 13 years, and then I'm thumbing my nose at the U.S. legal system, and then I just need to turn myself in, and if I want an air ambulance, I got to pay for it myself. And even worse, in my medical report, it makes it clear that flying that far, even an air ambulance, can endanger my life. It's 2,000 miles back to the U.S., back to Pennsylvania from here. The neighboring island is 60 miles. I can make a 60-mile trip in an air ambulance, but 2,000 miles is a whole different story. Not to mention it costs way more, and I don't got that kind of money. I can get to the neighboring island, but even just that distance in an air ambulance could endanger my life, just that trip. And he's insisting, nope, it's the only way because I've Googled it.
Yeah, so clearly they believe they've got the leverage on you. They know where you are. You're not likely to leave, and they're just expecting that as your condition wears against you, at some point you're gonna crumble and give up.
Not quite. No, they want me to pass away. Because if I pass away, then they don't. You got to remember, there have been so many mistakes made in this case. These people are protecting their careers. That's what it is right now. They want to protect their careers because Christian Trable, and I don't know this part for a fact, but I used to be an expert witness in court for something completely under this back in the 90s. And so I got a lot of chances to watch how courts work. And these DAs, they're always up talking to the judges between sessions and things about golf and things like that. And a lot of these DAs are edging to be judges. And I suspect that he's either trying for his boss's job as a senior DA or becoming a judge. And he wants to protect his legacy at all costs. And it's a cover their butt operation. It's plain and simple. And they want me to die here. If I die here, this all goes away for them.
We've spent almost an hour together, and viewers may not realize we've had to stop a couple of times because of your condition and let you take a break. Let me ask you something, a couple of final questions that I know people would want to know about.
Mm-hmm. Ask whatever you want.
What's the situation with your kid now? I assume he's no longer a minor.
26.
Okay, he's 26 years old. Obviously, he can speak for himself. Has he expressed any support for you? Any explanation of his time? What are his life choices at this?
Well, he did 2 TV interviews last year. He did one on Erie news station, WJET, where he said, listen, I'm not missing. I've never been missing. This is a bunch of garbage from my mom. My dad's dying. He needs health care. Please help. That was July 2021 on WJET TV Erie News. And it made it into MSN and a bunch of other national news, but nothing came of it because the FBI just wants to cover up. The FBI has intimidated media before. When I've had people offer to interview me in the past. The FBI finds out and the FBI calls them up and says things like, we understand you're talking to Mr. Howard here, and we're just, we're not telling you can't do it, but we're just saying it wouldn't look good. It wouldn't be very good for your career if you went through with this interview. And then they dropped me. They intimidated one of my lawyers in Tennessee, the FBI, and it's not the whole FBI. It's the one FBI agent, the one guy that did all this lying, did this. I call him, he's a special agent. I call him special agent because he's obviously very special. But he will call them up. He called my lawyers in Tennessee, and I got a call from my lawyer in Tennessee. And my lawyer said, he says, listen, in my whole legal career, at that time, he had been a lawyer for like 10 or 15 years. He was fairly prominent. He says, I've never been so scared in my legal career in my life. He says, the FBI called me and he says, listen, I'm not dropping you, but I want to let you know I was scared. I've never been that scared in my life when the FBI called, and I felt like I was being intimidated. And that's what they do.
Yeah. So it kind of begs the question. They're probably willing, or maybe they can't do anything, but they're probably willing just to leave you there in St. Kitts until you give up or you die.
That's exactly what they want.
What are you trying to accomplish? You went on TikTok. You've had extraordinary. I mean, you went to what, 50,000 viewers pretty quickly.
I went from 740 followers to 40,000 in 1 week, and I had several viral videos. That one video is at 4.1 million views, and it hit that in like 3 days.
And now you're talking to me, and the hope is that we can get your story out to a few people that might be in a position to help. What are you trying to accomplish right now? Because you're giving them a black eye. They're not likely to take that very well. What's the end game for you?
Well, the end game's simple. Once we get actual media coverage, like real coverage, the DA is going to be so embarrassed, he's going to drop this case. The thing is, the DA can dismiss this in about 5 minutes. He could have already done it when we asked him to. He can just be like, you know what, this is an old case, doesn't make any sense, I don't want it anymore, sign off. He goes to the judge signs off, done. It takes a few days to get in the system. I can travel, I can go to a neighboring island, get my health care, and save my life. It's really that simple. But until we embarrass him, nothing's ever going to make them back down from behind the scenes, because he's the DA. He's a federal DA, and they're willing to play dirty. They accuse me of being a drug dealer down here too. What they do is when they can't get you, they try and slander you through a country. So what they did is, in a diplomatic communication, they use what I call the magic maybe. They stick the word maybe in front of an accusation. So they say things like, we have evidence he may be a former drug dealer. I've never dealt drugs in my life. Okay, never been involved in them. And so then what happens is the government comes and bothers you. And then when you point out, when you're like, well, you know, if you're going to do this, you better show me the accusation. So they show it to you. And I'm like, do you see the word maybe? And they're like, oh, we didn't even notice that. Because when you read something from the US government and it says, we have evidence he may be a former drug dealer, you don't see the word maybe. You just see drug dealer, US government. And then when I point out maybe, they're like, oh, yeah, you're right. And they just keep throwing these maybes at me. And it's really hard.
So what?
Now the government down here will ignore them because they've been lied to so many times. The government's told them, listen, don't even bother us with regards to Mr. Howard. Don't even bother us.
So what? You've got to be concerned, because when the feds get frustrated with the legal process, they're likely to turn to a extra legal process.
And they've already done that.
And men in your situation have experienced the process known as rendition. Have you given that some thought, that they're not going to try and extradite you, that you're going to get this publicity, that they're going to get embarrassed, there's going to be people asking questions, and they say, you know, let's just take it another direction?
Well, the way I look at it is, I've got nothing to lose. I'm already Interpol Red, which is the highest level. Interpol Red is Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden had a red notice for him. And on top of that, my red notice isn't even published. You can't find that on the website. And I have a copy of the Interpol file, and I've published it. And it says non-published, not published to the media, not published to the website. Normally, they only keep the files private for like terrorists and things. So not only did they put an Interpol Red, they put me at the highest level of Interpol Red. And they didn't, in the Interpol file, it doesn't say wanted for custody. It says kidnapping. It doesn't give any details. It doesn't say what it is. It just says international kidnapping. So that's why when they picked me up in Bulgaria, it was 2 police cars and 5 police officers, armed police officers. They didn't want me getting away because, hey, I was a huge international kidnapper. It's the US. So as far as them coming after me, my wife says the same thing. I said, what are they going to do to me? I'm dying here. What are they going to do to me? Come pick me up and give me health care? Ooh, I'm scared. I mean, and the government here is already, you know, we've been through several new administrations here. We have new prime minister. The parties have changed several times here. They're not going to give me up here because it's an embarrassment to the US. So unless they're going to come and try and take me out, and that's not likely because I'm so sick, I don't leave the house. I only left the house 5 times in the last year. And those were very brief trips. I don't leave the house. I can't. We're well secured here. They're not going to risk another diplomatic incident trying to get me. It's much easier for them just to leave me here and die. And that's why I can go in TikTok and media and I can punch them, because I have documentary evidence for all of it. I have all the corridors. I have thousands of pages of documentation. I have my Interpol file. I have all the Bulgarian stuff translated. I have letters from the lawyers. I have letters from the courts here. I have everything. They have nothing to stand on. So I challenge them. If they want to come get me, we've told them, go ahead, file the extradition request. Go ahead. You want to come get me? Come get me.
Is there anything else you want to say to anybody who's watching this video? How can they help you? It sounds like what you want is justice, and hopefully there would be people out there who would have an interest in that. What would you ask of them?
Right now, I want media coverage. I want Christian Trable to dismiss this, and I want to be able to travel for healthcare to save my life. That's all I care about right now. The rest of it, I'll deal with later, because right now my health condition is so bad. I mean, I look kind of okay right now, but that's because we knew we were going to talk. I got a large stone out today. It was about 4 millimeters in diameter. That's big enough to kill somebody. So I'm feeling a little bit better, and I took a lot of painkillers before we talked. So after we do this, I'm probably going to crash again. And I need desperate, urgent, life-saving, immediate medical care. I'm not asking anybody to pay for it. I'm not starting to GoFundMe. I'm not demanding the U.S. government. All I want is Christian Trable to spend 5 minutes, dismiss this because it's a farce, clear me off Interpol, and then I will travel on my own and pay for my own health care. I don't know. Maybe I'll need some financial help, but I'll deal with it later. The point is, get me free so I can save my life.
All right, Chad, we'll do the best we can, and we will also ask people to pray for you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right. God bless you. Thank you for spending the time with us. Folks, you've heard from Chad Howard today. Please give this some consideration. Share with your friends and family, both for prayers and anyone in a position maybe to help him out. God bless you.
Thank you.